In the span of 60 seconds, at the most exclusive charity gala of the year, a billionaire's wife publicly destroyed a waiter's life, and a retired United States general saved it. All because of a tattoo hidden beneath a wine-stained sleeve. This is the story of two invisible Americas colliding. On one side, the glittering world of billionaires and retired commanders. On the other, a single father and former soldier working two jobs just to keep the lights on. It asks one searing question: when the uniform comes off, does the sacrifice ever truly end? And what happens when the only person who remembers isn't a comrade, but the man whose entire command you once saved? To understand the explosion at the gala, you have to meet the man holding the match. His name is Michael Vance. At 34, he is a former Army sergeant, a single father to a 7-year-old girl named Chloe, and according to 3 different job agencies, overqualified for every position he applies for. Michael's world is a carefully balanced equation of desperation and dignity. His apartment is a 500-square-foot box in a neighborhood that appears in real estate listings as transitional. His car, a 10-year-old sedan, has a check engine light that has been on for so long he considers it a nightlight. His uniform, when he's not in his waiter's blacks, is a worn pair of jeans and the same leather jacket he bought the year he enlisted. But within this compressed life exists a universe of responsibility. Every decision is filtered through one question: is this good for Chloe? He left the army after 8 years, 2 tours, and a lower back injury that doesn't show up on x-rays but announces itself every cold morning. The transition, as they call it, was not a bridge but a cliff. The skills that kept men alive in the dust of Helmand Province, hypervigilance, the ability to operate on no sleep, following complex orders under extreme stress, translated on a civilian resume to a single, unhelpful line: team player. The Veterans Affairs Office helped him update his resume. The job market helped him understand it was worthless. So he pieced together a life. From 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., Monday through Friday, he stocked shelves at a home improvement warehouse. The work was monotonous, physically punishing, and exactly the kind of labor his VA counselor warned him his injury couldn't handle. But it offered health insurance. And from 6 p.m. to close, 4 nights a week and every Saturday, he waited tables at the Oak Room, an upscale steakhouse where the average check could cover his monthly electric bill. He was the quiet one, efficient, memorizing orders without writing them down, a ghost in a white shirt. His co-workers knew he was a veteran the way you know a fact you never discuss. They saw the tattoos that crept above his collar when he bent over a table. They noticed the way he flinched at sudden loud noises, like a dropped tray, and called it being jumpy. His only luxuries were Saturday afternoons with Chloe. No work, no errands, just the park or the library or a movie they'd both seen 10 times. It was during one of these afternoons, as Chloe played on the swings, that he got the text from his Oak Room manager. A last-minute call-off for a massive private event. The Sterling Foundation Gala. Top-tier catering staff needed. Pay $300 for 5 hours, plus guaranteed tips. It was more than he made in 2 regular shifts. It was the difference between making rent on the 1st of the month and the 5th, between the good brand of peanut butter and the generic one Chloe complained about. He said yes before he even knew what the gala was. Now let's meet the other side of the collision. General James Caldwell, retired, 61 years old, lived in a world measured in acreage and influence. His service record was the stuff of Pentagon legend: commanding officer of the 101st Airborne, architect of the evacuation during Operation Northern Wind, a chest full of medals that weighed more than some men's courage. His retirement was not an end, but a pivot. He sat on 3 corporate boards, chaired the Sterling Foundation, a military family charity, and gave keynote speeches for $25,000 an hour. He was a man who had traded a command tent for a corner office, battlefield intelligence for market intelligence. He was, by any measure, a success story. But in his own home, he commanded nothing. His wife, Elena, was his third, and 22 years his junior. She was a former fashion publicist who had curated her life with the same ruthless precision she once applied to celebrity client lists. Their marriage, to the polite society that gossiped about it, was a transaction. He provided status, stability, and an entree into the highest echelons of old money respectability. She provided the polish, the social savvy, and the relentless ambition he had lost after leaving the service. The Caldwells did not have a marriage, they had a merger, and the annual Sterling Foundation Gala was their annual shareholder meeting. For Alina, the gala was everything. It was her masterpiece. The guest list, the floral arrangements from Holland, the seating chart that took 3 weeks to finalize, these were her weapons in a silent war against every other society wife in the city. A single misstep, a minor scandal, a whisper of impropriety could undo years of social climbing. Her anxiety in the week leading up to the event was a palpable force in their 20-room estate. Staff walked on eggshells. The general, sensing a battlefield with no clear objective, largely retreated to his study. The gala itself was held in the cavernous, marble-lined ballroom of the historic Pendleton Hotel. The guest list was a who's who of defense contractors, senators, old-money philanthropists, and celebrities with a patriotic brand to maintain. The air smelled of gardenias, expensive perfume, and ambition. Waiters like Michael moved through the crowd like drones, silent, efficient, invisible. They were background scenery, human furniture. To the guests, they were not individuals, they were a function. A hand that offered champagne, an arm that cleared a plate. Michael's section was near the head table where the Caldwells held court. He had been briefed on the menu, the wine pairings, the specific dietary restrictions of the ambassador's wife. He was told, in no uncertain terms, to be seen and not heard, to anticipate needs but not initiate contact. He was a ghost. He noticed the general first. There was a bearing to the man, a stillness amid the chatter that Michael recognized instantly. It was a command presence. It made the back of Michael's neck prickle with a mix of respect and old, ingrained habit. He kept his head down, his eyes on his tasks. Pour the water. Clear the bread plate. Do not make eye contact. He noticed Alina Caldwell an hour in. Her laugh was a sharp, high sound that cut through the murmur of the room. She held the attention of her table like a conductor, her gestures broad, her critiques of the charity's ballet performance delivered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Michael watched as she snapped her fingers, not even looking, for another waiter to take a half-finished glass of wine. He saw the flicker of annoyance on the young waiter's face before it was schooled into blankness. A small, cold knot formed in Michael's stomach. The incident happened during the dessert course. Michael was presenting a plate of flourless chocolate cake to the philanthropist seated to Alina's left. As he leaned forward, his sleeve brushed against the stem of Alina's freshly poured $2,000 bottle of Bordeaux. It was the lightest contact, a whisper of fabric on crystal. The glass wobbled, a single shallow wave of crimson liquid sloshing over the rim onto the pristine white tablecloth. A sudden, dead silence enveloped the immediate table. All conversation stopped. Alina Caldwell looked down at the spreading stain, a dark red bloom on white linen. Then she slowly, deliberately lifted her eyes to Michael. Her expression was not one of anger, but of pure, distilled contempt. It was the look you give a bug you are about to crush. "You clumsy oaf," she said, her voice low but carrying perfectly in the quiet. "This is Valentino." Before Michael could form an apology, before he could even straighten up, she moved. It wasn't a slap. It was a gesture of dismissal so profound it took his brain a second to catch up. She picked up her own full glass of wine, and with a cold, controlled motion, she poured it, not over his head, not in his face, but directly onto the center of his chest, soaking his crisp white waiter's shirt in a spreading, purple-red stain. The cold shock of it hit him first, then the smell of the wine, then the deafening, roaring silence of 400 people who had just witnessed a billionaire's wife publicly execute a waiter's dignity. Michael froze. His training screamed at him to react, to do something, but he was not in a war zone. He was in a ballroom, his hands clenched at his sides. He could feel every eye in the room burning into him, could hear the suppressed gasps, the nervous titters. He saw the other waiters staring, horrified. He saw the general, who had been in conversation, turn his head slowly at the commotion. In that suspended second, Michael Vance was no longer a father, a veteran, a man. He was a wine stain, a punchline, a prop in Alina Caldwell's performance of absolute power. His jaw tightened, his muscles coiling with a humiliation so deep it felt like a physical wound. He was prepared for anything in that moment, to be fired, to be screamed at, to walk out. What he was not prepared for was what happened next. Because General James Caldwell was now standing, not quickly, but with a heavy, deliberate finality that drew every remaining shred of attention in the room. His eyes were not on his wife. They were locked on Michael, and they were not filled with anger or embarrassment or social fury. They were wide with a dawning, impossible recognition. His gaze was fixed on Michael's left forearm, where the soaked shirt sleeve had tightened, revealing the stark, unmistakable lines of a military tattoo now visible through the wet fabric. It was the insignia of the 101st Airborne, and beneath it, a series of dates and coordinates. The general's face, usually an impassive mask of command, underwent a seismic shift. His mouth opened slightly, his eyes glistened. He took one step away from the table, his dinner chair scraping loudly on the marble floor. And then, in the dead silence of the grand ballroom, General James Caldwell, war hero, retired commander, and one of the most powerful men in the room, did the one thing no one expected. He straightened his spine to perfect military posture, brought his right hand up in a razor-sharp salute, and held it. His eyes, now streaming with unchecked tears, remained locked on the stunned, wine-soaked waiter before him. For 5 full seconds, the only sound in the ballroom was the hum of the air conditioning and the ragged, choked breath of a retired general holding a salute. Then he spoke. His voice, accustomed to commanding battalions, was thick with an emotion that shocked the room more than the wine had. "Sergeant Vance." The words weren't loud, but they carried. They weren't a question, they were an identification, a recognition. The use of his former rank hit Michael like a physical blow. He hadn't been called that in 5 years. His body reacted before his mind, his shoulders squaring, his spine straightening out of pure muscle memory. He didn't return the salute. He couldn't. He was frozen. "Look at me, son," the general said, his voice breaking. Michael forced his eyes up from the ruined tablecloth to meet the general's. What he saw there wasn't pity. It was awe. It was grief. It was a kind of reverence that made no sense in this room. The general slowly lowered his salute, but he didn't sit. He turned his body to face the stunned table, his gaze sweeping over his wife's horrified face, over the confused expressions of the defense contractor and the senator's wife. "This man," the general began, his voice gaining strength, echoing now in the cavernous silence, "is not a waiter. He is Sergeant Michael Vance, United States Army, 101st Airborne. And 7 years ago, in a valley in Afghanistan that doesn't appear on any tourist map, he saved my life. He saved every life in my command." A wave of murmurs swept the room. Phones, which had been discreetly tucked away, were now openly raised. Elena Caldwell's face had drained of all color, her hand still loosely holding the empty wine glass. She looked from her husband to the stained, silent man and back again, as if trying to solve an impossible equation. The general continued, his eyes never leaving Michael. "We were ambushed. Our convoy was hit. I was trapped in a burning vehicle. The radio was dead. The situation was, it was terminal. And this man," he said, pointing a trembling finger at Michael, "ran through a kill zone everyone else was hiding from. He didn't follow orders. There were no orders left to follow. He made a decision. He pulled me from that wreckage, and then he organized a defense. He called in the coordinates for air support, and he held a perimeter with 3 wounded men and 70 rounds of ammunition for 45 minutes until extraction arrived. He was awarded the Silver Star for that. He saved 18 men that day, and I never knew what happened to him after he mustered out." The general took a step closer to Michael, ignoring the gasps, ignoring the hundreds of eyes. "That tattoo on your arm, the screaming eagle with the dates, I've only ever seen it on the men who were there, in the dirt, in the blood, in that valley. I designed it myself for the survivors." Michael could only nod, a sharp, jerky motion. The memory of that day, the smell of fuel and blood, the weight of the colonel, then a colonel, as he dragged him from the Humvee, it all flooded back with a violence that stole his breath. He had pushed it down for so long, compartmentalized it into a box labeled before. "You disappeared," the general said, and now the tears were openly tracking through the stubble on his cheeks. "I looked. When I got back stateside, I tried to find you, to thank you. The file said you left the service, no forwarding address. And now I find you here, in this room, being treated like. He couldn't finish, he didn't have to. The condemnation in his unfinished sentence hung in the air, heavier and more damning than any shout. It was a verdict on the entire room, on the entire glittering, oblivious world that had reduced a hero to a piece of scenery. Then the general did something even more extraordinary. He turned to his wife. His expression was no longer emotional, it was cold. It was the face he must have used when ordering an airstrike. "Elena," he said, his voice dangerously calm, "you will apologize to Sergeant Vance, right now." The room held its collective breath. This was no longer a poignant reunion. This was a detonation at the very core of social and marital power. Elena Caldwell stared at her husband, her lips parted in disbelief. The command was not a request, it was an order, and for the first time in their marriage, she was on the receiving end of the full force of his will, not as a society husband, but as a general. Her social survival instincts warred with her utter humiliation. She glanced around, seeing not sympathy, but a gallery of witnesses whose opinions she valued above all else. She was trapped. A faint, high-pitched noise of distress escaped her. "James, he spilled." "I don't care what he spilled." The general's roar was sudden, primal, shaking the crystal on the table. It was the voice that had commanded thousands. "You will apologize to this American hero, or you will leave this event, and you will not return to my home." The finality of it was absolute. The "my home" was the killing blow. It clarified the transaction of their merger in the most brutal terms possible. The pretense was over. Elena Caldwell, her face a mask of porcelain fury and terror, slowly turned her head toward Michael. Her eyes were glassy, her jaw rigid. The words, when they came, were barely audible, forced through clenched teeth. "I apologize." It was the least apologetic apology ever uttered. It was a weapon, but it was a weapon that had just been turned on its owner. Michael said nothing. He didn't nod. He didn't accept. He just stood there, the wine cold on his chest, a monument to dignified silence. His lack of response was more powerful than any words. It said, "Your apology is irrelevant. Your world is a joke." The general seemed to understand. He gave a single, sharp nod. Then he turned back to the table, to his stunned guests. "The gala is over. The bar is closed. The Sterling Foundation will be issuing a full refund to every attendee tonight and a matching donation to the Veterans Transition Alliance in Sergeant Vance's name. Good evening." He didn't wait for a response. He walked around the table, past his paralyzed wife, and placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. The touch was firm, grounding. "Come with me, Sergeant, we are leaving." And in a scene that would be dissected on social media for weeks, General James Caldwell, in his $20,000 tuxedo, led a wine-stained waiter through the parted crowd of billionaires and celebrities, out of the ballroom and into the night. Not as employer and employee, not as benefactor and charity case, but as one soldier bringing another home from a different kind of battlefield. But the story, of course, did not end at the hotel doors. It was just beginning to explode. In the ballroom, as the shocked guests began a frenzied, whispered exodus, Elena Caldwell remained standing at the ruined table. The video from a defense contractor's wife, who had been recording the ballet performance, was already being trimmed and uploaded. The caption was being drafted: "Billionaire's wife, HUMILIATS waiter, then her husband destroys her when he realizes who he is." The modern court of public opinion was now in session, and the first piece of evidence was going viral. Meanwhile, in the backseat of the general's town car, rolling through the neon-lit streets, Michael Vance finally began to shake. Not from cold, but from the seismic release of 7 years of compressed pride, struggle, and invisibility. He stared at his hands, still smelling of wine and humiliation, but now also trembling with a strange, terrifying sense of vindication. The general sat beside him, silent for several blocks. Then he spoke, his voice quiet in the dark interior. "I meant what I said, Michael. I looked for you. I wanted to make sure you were set up. The VA said you were fine. They said you had a job, a plan." Michael let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. "I had a plan, sir. The plan was to not be a burden. The plan was to work. The VA's idea of fine and my daughter's idea of fine are two different things. The general absorbed this. A daughter. Chloe, she's 7. She's the reason for all of this. He gestured vaguely, encompassing the waiter's uniform, the wine stain, the second job, the exhaustion. And her mother. Not in the picture. Michael's tone closed that door firmly. The general nodded, a man familiar with loss. Where can I take you, Sergeant? Your home. The word home felt alien. The small, dark apartment waiting for him, with its leaking faucet and stack of unpaid bills, suddenly seemed like an indictment of the entire country he'd served. He gave the address anyway. As the car navigated the city, the general made a phone call. It was brief. Margaret, it's James. Cancel everything tomorrow. Then find me the name of the best veteran employment lawyer in the city and the head of human resources at Caliber Systems. I'll be in the office at 7 a.m. He listened for a moment. No, my wife will not be joining me, that's all. He hung up. The machinery of his civilian power was now engaged, and it was being directed with military precision at a single objective: correcting a wrong. When the car pulled up to Michael's apartment building, the general got out with him. He stood on the cracked sidewalk, looking at the dimly lit facade. This is where you live. It's what I can afford, sir. The general's face hardened. Not anymore. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a simple, embossed business card. On the back, he wrote a phone number. This is my personal line, not my assistant. Mine, you call me tomorrow. We are going to fix this, not as charity, as a debt of honor. Do you understand? Michael took the card. The weight of it in his hand felt more significant than the silver star he kept in a shoebox under his bed. I understand, sir. Good. The general did something then that he hadn't done in the ballroom. He offered his hand, not a salute, but a handshake between men. Michael took it. The grip was firm, sure. Welcome back, Sergeant Vance. He got back in the car and drove away. Michael stood on the sidewalk, the cool night air hitting the wet patch on his shirt. He looked down at the card, then up at the dark window of his apartment where his daughter was sleeping at a neighbor's. For the first time in years, a feeling unfurled in his chest that he didn't immediately shut down. It was hope. It was dangerous, fragile, and terrifying. He had no way of knowing that while he slept, the world was about to erupt. By 6 a.m. the next morning, the video had 17 million views. It had been picked up by every major news outlet. The narrative had crystallized into a perfect, explosive allegory. The forgotten veteran, the heartless elite, the righteous general. Memes were made. Hashtags were trending: Winegate, salute the waiter, Coldwell crumbles. News vans were already gathering outside the Coldwell's gated estate. Pundits were screaming about class warfare and military disrespect on cable news. The Sterling Foundation's website had crashed under the weight of traffic, both from outraged donors demanding refunds and from citizens making small donations in Michael's name. And in a luxury high-rise across town, Elena Coldwell was staring at her reflection in a floor-to-ceiling window, holding a tablet that displayed the comments section of a news article. Every comment was a dagger: gold digger, monster, national disgrace. Her social media was a graveyard of cancelled invitations and unfollows. Her publicist had resigned via email at 3 a.m. She was ruined, and she knew exactly who to blame. She picked up her phone, her fingers trembling with rage, and dialed a number from memory. It wasn't her husband's. It was a private investigator she had used once before, during the prenuptial agreement negotiations. It's Elena Coldwell, she said, her voice icy and controlled. I have a job for you. I want you to dig up everything on a man named Michael Vance. Everything. I don't care what it costs. I want to know what he's hiding. The private investigator's report landed in Elena Coldwell's inbox 48 hours later. It was not the salvation she had hoped for. It was a detonator. The report was exhaustive. It outlined Michael Vance's life in stark, data-driven detail. His honorable discharge, his lower back injury rated at only 30% disability by the VA, his employment history, a patchwork of short-term warehouse jobs, the waiter position, a failed attempt at a small handyman business that had collapsed when his truck's transmission gave out. His finances, $42,000 in combined medical and credit card debt. His custody arrangement, full legal and physical custody of his daughter, Chloe, with the mother's parental rights terminated due to substance abuse and abandonment. His current residence, the 500-square-foot apartment owned by a notoriously negligent landlord with multiple code violations. To Elena, scanning the pages from her silk-upholstered sitting room, this was not a portrait of a hero. It was a portrait of a failure, a man who couldn't provide, who lived in squalor, who was one missed paycheck away from total collapse. She saw leverage. She saw vulnerability. She saw a story she could twist. She didn't go to the media. That was too crude. Instead, she went to her remaining friends in the upper echelons of the city's social circles. Over whispered lunches and private club meetings, she began to spin a new narrative. The true story. Hadn't James always been emotionally fragile after the war, prone to fits of misplaced loyalty? This Vance character was clearly a manipulator. He had probably sought out the gala deliberately, knowing the general would be there. He had engineered the entire scene to exploit James's guilt and PTSD for financial gain. The spilled wine, likely staged. The tattoo, conveniently visible. It was a long con targeting a vulnerable old soldier. The story, wrapped in the language of concern for the general's mental well-being, began to seep into the ecosystem of elite gossip. It was just plausible enough to sow doubt. It reframed James Caldwell not as a righteous hero, but as a dupe. It reframed Michael Vance not as a victim, but as a grifter. Meanwhile, in the real world, Michael was trying to navigate a surreal new reality. He had called the general, as instructed. A meeting was set at the headquarters of Caliber Systems, the defense contractor where Caldwell sat on the board. Michael wore his only suit, a decade-old garment that pulled at the shoulders. He was ushered into a corner office with a view of the entire city. The general was not alone. With him was a severe-looking woman introduced as Margaret Shaw, the company's head of human resources, and a man named David Chen, a lawyer specializing in veteran employment law. "We have a proposal, Michael," the general began, bypassing small talk. "Caliber Systems has an immediate opening for a logistics coordinator. It requires security clearance, organizational skills, and the ability to perform under pressure. Your service record indicates you are more than qualified. The starting salary is $85,000, with full benefits and a potential annual bonus." Michael felt the floor shift beneath him. $85,000. It was more than double what he made working 2 jobs. It was stability, it was breathing room, it was Chloe's future. But then the lawyer Chen slid a folder across the polished table. "This is a standard employment contract. However, there is an addendum requested by General Caldwell. It includes a full scholarship fund for your daughter, covering private school tuition through high school and a 4-year college fund. It is not a loan. It is a grant contingent on your continued employment." Michael opened the folder. The numbers swam before his eyes. It was a life raft. No, it was a luxury yacht. It was everything he had ever been told he couldn't have. His throat tightened. I don't know what to say, sir." "Say yes," the general said, a faint smile touching his eyes for the first time. "Then go home and tell your daughter she can be whatever she wants to be." But as Michael's pen hovered over the signature line, Margaret Shaw cleared her throat. "There is, of course, the matter of the public attention, Mr. Vance. The company's PR department feels that your notoriety could be a double-edged sword. We would require you to participate in a managed press conference, to tell your story, to align it with Caliber's commitment to hiring veterans. It would mean becoming a public figure to a degree." The room seemed to cool by 10 degrees. Michael slowly put the pen down, becoming a story, having his life, Chloe's life, picked apart by cameras and commentators. The memory of the ballroom of 400 staring eyes flashed before him. "I'm a private person, ma'am, and my daughter, she's been through enough." The general leaned forward. "Michael, I understand, but this is the world we live in. The story is already public. This is a chance to control the narrative, to use it for good, to show other veterans that service is still valued." It was a moral bargain. His privacy in exchange for his daughter's security. He thought of Chloe's small hand in his, of her asking if they could ever move to an apartment with a real bathtub. He picked up the pen and signed. The press conference was scheduled for 3 days later. In the interim, Michael gave his notice at both his jobs. He bought Chloe a new dress, a bright blue one she'd been eyeing in a store window for months. He allowed himself, for one evening, to believe in the possibility of a quiet, stable future. He had no idea that Alina Caldwell's counter-narrative was about to achieve critical mass. The day before the press conference, an anonymous source close to the Caldwell family gave an exclusive interview to a popular gossip website. The article was titled, "The Waiter Hero's Hidden Struggles, Debt, Desperation, and a Calculated Encounter." It presented all the facts from the Pie's report, but framed through Alina's poisonous lens. It highlighted the debt, the failed business, the custody battle. It posed questions about the remarkable coincidence of the gala meeting. It quoted concerned friends who worried the general was being used. The article stopped just short of making direct accusations. It was a masterpiece of insinuation. It went viral instantly, picked up by tabloids and cable news talking heads who needed a both sides angle to the feel-good story. The public's unwavering support for Michael began to crack. Comments sections split into warring camps. Was he a hero, or was he a savvy opportunist? When Michael saw the article on his phone, a cold dread settled in his stomach. It was all true, and yet it was all a lie. The facts were weaponized, stripped of context, of struggle, of the daily grind of trying to be a good father while drowning. He saw the comments calling him a charity case and a professional victim. The general was furious. He stormed into his wife's wing of the house, the printed article in his hand. The confrontation was brief and atomic. He accused her of treachery. She accused him of sentimental stupidity. He told her to pack her things. She told him he'd be a laughingstock. It ended with the sound of a door slamming so hard it shook the crystal in the cabinet. But the damage was done. The board at Caliber Systems grew nervous. Margaret Shaw called the general. The press conference was now a potential minefield. Should they postpone, rescind the offer? The general's authority, absolute in a war zone, was being questioned in a corporate boardroom. He insisted they proceed. His reputation was now inextricably tied to Michael's. The press conference was held in the Caliber Systems atrium. A bank of microphones awaited. News crews from every major network lined the back of the room. Michael stood in a side office, wearing his new suit, watching the crowd gather through a crack in the door. He felt like a man walking to his own execution. The general laid a hand on his shoulder. "Just tell the truth, Sergeant. It's all you've ever had. It's all you need." They walked out together. The flash of cameras was blinding. The general gave a short, firm statement condemning the cowardly smear campaign and affirming his absolute faith in Michael Vance's character. Then he turned the podium over to Michael. Michael approached the microphone, his palms sweating. He looked out at the sea of expectant, skeptical faces. He saw the teleprompter scrolling with a prepared statement about gratitude and new beginnings. He took a deep breath, and then he pushed the prepared remarks aside. "My name is Michael Vance," he began, his voice steady but quiet, forcing the room to listen closely. "I am a father, I am a veteran, and until last week I was invisible." He paused, letting the words hang. "The article you all read is correct about the facts. I am in debt. My business failed. I live in a small apartment. I worked 2 jobs that left me too tired to read my daughter a bedtime story most nights. What the article calls calculated, I call trying to survive. What it calls desperation, I call love for my little girl." He looked directly into the main camera. "I did not seek out General Caldwell. I took a job serving food because it paid $300, which was the difference between my daughter having new shoes for school or wearing ones with holes in them. The wine was an accident. The humiliation was real. The general's recognition was a shock to me. It was the first time in 5 years anyone had looked at me and seen the man I used to be instead of just the help." His voice wavered, but he pressed on. "I am not a hero for wanting to feed my child. I am not a villain for failing sometimes. I am just a man who served his country and then found that country had no place for him. General Caldwell is offering me a place, not because I'm perfect, but because he believes that service shouldn't end in poverty and invisibility. I'm going to take that chance, for my daughter, and I'm going to spend every day proving that his faith in me was not a mistake." He stepped back from the podium. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then a single reporter in the front row began to clap, then another, then the entire room erupted in applause that was not wild, but respectful, deeply felt. The raw, unvarnished truth had cut through the spin. The narrative had just been reclaimed. Back in her sitting room, watching the live feed, Elena Caldwell saw her victory turn to ash. The man she had painted as a schemer had just shown himself to be the most authentic person in the room. She was not just losing the battle, she was being exposed as the villain in a story where she desperately needed to be the victim. As the press conference wrapped up, David Chen, the lawyer, approached Michael with a grim expression. He was holding his phone. "Mr. Vance, we need to talk. Immediately. It's about your daughter's mother. The Pies report triggered something. She's seen the news. She's seen the money. And she's just filed an emergency motion in family court to reopen the custody case." The custody filing was a tactical nuclear weapon, and it had been launched from the one silo Michael thought was permanently decommissioned. Chloe's mother, Lauren, had been absent for 4 years. Her rights had been terminated by a judge after she failed to appear for 3 consecutive hearings and was found, through a social worker's report, to be living in a known drug house. The termination was supposed to be permanent, but Lauren's petition claimed a massive change in circumstances. She argued she was now sober, gainfully employed, and that Michael's new high-profile life, the media scrutiny, the sudden wealth from a controversial billionaire, created an unstable and potentially dangerous environment for a child. She requested immediate temporary custody pending a full investigation. Michael read the filing in David Chen's office, his hands shaking so badly the papers rattled. "She hasn't seen Chloe since she was 3. She doesn't even know her favorite color. This isn't about Chloe. This is about the money." She saw the news. "It doesn't matter what it's about," Chen said gently. "It matters what a family court judge believes, and she has a court-appointed attorney arguing that a sudden influx of wealth and fame is disruptive. We need to respond, and we need to respond perfectly." The general, when informed, was silent for a full minute. "This is my fault," he said finally. "The publicity." "No, sir," Michael interrupted, a new steely calm settling over his panic. "This is her fault, and we're going to fight it. But I need to know, is this going to be too much for Caliber, the board?" The general's expression hardened. "The board will do as I say. Your job is safe. Your daughter's future is what we focus on now." The legal battle was swift and brutal. Lauren's case was weak, but it was aggressive. She gave tearful interviews on daytime talk shows, portraying herself as a mother robbed of her child, now fighting against a military machine and a billionaire's manipulation. The media, always hungry for a new angle, gave her a platform. The public sentiment, so recently solidified behind Michael, began to churn with uncertainty again. Michael's response was not played out in the press. It was played out in a quiet family courtroom. He didn't bring the general. He didn't bring a PR team. He brought Chloe's pediatrician, her first-grade teacher, and the neighbor who watched her after school. He brought a folder of drawings Chloe had made of their life, pictures of him making pancakes, of them at the library, of their small, tidy apartment. He brought bank statements showing he had paid every bill on time, even if it was late. He brought his new employment contract, not as a symbol of wealth, but as a promise of stability. When he took the stand, he didn't speak about Lauren. He spoke about Chloe. He described her fear of thunderstorms, her love of books about dinosaurs, the way she arranged her stuffed animals in order of size every night. He described the 2 years of silence after Lauren left, the nights Chloe cried for a mother who never called. He described his promise to her that she would always be safe, always be loved, always have a home. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, listened impassively. Lauren's case unraveled under cross-examination. Her gainful employment was a part-time cashier job she'd held for 3 weeks. Her sobriety was supported by a single letter from a free clinic she'd visited once. When asked specific questions about Chloe's health, her school, her friends, Lauren had no answers. She could not name her daughter's teacher. She did not know she was allergic to peanuts. The judge's ruling was delivered from the bench. Parental rights, once terminated, are not reinstated because a parent's financial circumstances change. The petitioner has demonstrated no sustained, meaningful rehabilitation, nor a pre-existing bond with the child to justify uprooting her from a stable, loving home. The motion is denied permanently. As the gavel fell, Michael didn't feel triumph. He felt a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The war was over, but the cost of fighting it, of having his and Chloe's most private wounds exposed in a public record, felt immense. Outside the courtroom, Lauren approached him, her eyes burning with a different kind of fire now, not legal but personal. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You think you've won? You just made yourself a target. Everyone knows who you are now. Everyone knows what you're worth." It was a threat, vague and chilling. David Chen stepped between them, ushering Michael away, but the words lingered. The invisibility he had resented had also been a shield. That shield was now gone forever. In the weeks that followed, a new equilibrium slowly formed. Michael started his job at Caliber Systems. The work was challenging but fair. For the first time in his adult life, he received a paycheck that didn't vanish the moment it arrived. He opened a college savings account for Chloe. He moved them to a clean, safe two-bedroom apartment in a better school district. The bathtub was her favorite feature. The public story began to fade from the headlines, replaced by the next scandal. But in the places that mattered, the ripples were permanent. The Sterling Foundation, under the General's sole direction after Alina's removal from the board, created a new program called the Vance Initiative, which provided interest-free loans and career counseling to veterans transitioning to civilian work. The first donation was a seven-figure sum from James Caldwell's personal fortune. Alina Caldwell's social annihilation was complete. The divorce was finalized with a stunningly one-sided settlement enforced by the prenuptial agreement she had once believed protected her. She moved to Europe, disappearing from the society pages that had once been her lifeline. The General did not speak of her again. One Saturday afternoon, 6 months after the gala, Michael and Chloe were packing a picnic basket for the park. The doorbell rang. It was General Caldwell, dressed not in a suit, but in khakis and a polo shirt. He looked older, but lighter. "I was in the neighborhood," he said, which was impossible. His neighborhood was 20 miles away. "Thought you might want some company." They went to the park. Chloe, who had met the General several times by now and had decided he was a nice giant, immediately enlisted him to help push her on the swing. Michael watched from a bench as the fearsome retired commander of the 101st Airborne gently pushed a 7-year-old girl, his face soft with a simple, uncomplicated joy. Later, as Chloe played on the jungle gym, the General sat next to Michael on the bench. "I'm retiring," he said, "from the boards, from the foundation, from all of it." Michael looked at him, surprised. "Why?" "Because I spent 20 years teaching men about honor, and then I spent 10 years in a world that has none. That gala, it wasn't just about you, Michael. It was the moment I saw my own life reflected in that wine stain. I was serving the wrong country. My wife was my last command post in a civilian world I never understood. I lost it." He looked out at the playing children. "I'm giving most of what's left to the foundation. I'm moving to a small house near the coast. I'm going to fish. I'm going to be quiet. And I'm going to make sure that what happened to you doesn't happen to the next sergeant, the next corporal, who comes home looking for a place to belong." Michael nodded. He understood the need to retreat to tend to wounds. "You saved me, sir, more than you know." "No," the General said, turning to him. "You saved me twice, once in that valley, and once in that ballroom, by reminding me what I had spent a decade forgetting, who I was supposed to be." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, faded black and white photograph. It was a group of soldiers, young, dirty, grinning in front of a battered Humvee. He pointed to a young man with a tired smile. "That's you 2 days after the ambush." He pointed to himself, his arm around the young sergeant's shoulders. "That's me. I look at that picture and I see the man I was proud to be. I lost him. You never lost him. You just got buried by the world for a while." He handed the photograph to Michael. "I want you to have this, to remember that the man in this picture is the same man who stood in that ballroom, and he's the same man sitting on this bench today. You never broke. The world just tried to bend you." Michael took the photograph, the paper fragile under his fingers. It was a piece of his history he thought was lost. It was a mirror reflecting a self he had been told was worthless. The general stood to leave. He shook Michael's hand, then called out a goodbye to Chloe, who waved enthusiastically. He walked away across the grass, a solitary figure finally heading home from a very long war. That evening, as Michael tucked Chloe into bed in her new room with purple walls, she looked up at him. "Daddy, is the sad giant going to be okay?" "Yeah, sweetheart," Michael said, smoothing her hair. "I think he finally is." "Good," she murmured, already half asleep, "because you're okay now too." He kissed her forehead and turned out the light. In the living room, he looked at the photograph on the mantel. The young soldier's eyes stared back, full of a future that hadn't happened yet. He thought of the long, difficult road between that dust and this quiet, safe apartment. He thought of the strange, brutal circuit that had brought him here, from war to invisibility to public humiliation to a salute that had shattered one world and rebuilt another. The phone on the coffee table buzzed. It was a text from David Chen, the lawyer. "Final piece of news. The investigation into your former landlord's code violations, spurred by our inquiries, has resulted in a citywide audit. The guy's being sued into oblivion. Every tenant in your old building is getting relocation assistance. Thought you'd want to know." Michael smiled in the dark. A final, quiet justice, a ripple he hadn't even intended to create. He was not a hero, he was not a victim, he was not a grifter or a charity case. He was a father, he was a worker, he was a man who had served and struggled and survived, and for the first time he was visible on his own terms. The story that began with a spilled glass of wine in a room full of strangers ended here, in a quiet apartment with a sleeping child and a future that was no longer a question mark. It was a promise, and he intended to keep it. So what do we do with a story like this? A story that is, let's be clear, a work of fiction, but one that vibrates with a truth we all recognize. Because while Michael Vance and General Caldwell exist only in narrative, the two worlds they represent are painfully real. The glittering, insulated world of absolute status and the invisible world of those who serve that status, often anonymously. The chasm between them isn't just about money, it's about dignity. It's about seeing, or choosing not to see, the full human being in front of you. The research tells us this isn't hypothetical. Among 73,000 military personnel surveyed, almost 1 in 3 reported experiencing discrimination. 1 in 5 reported bullying. For veterans transitioning to civilian life, the statistics paint a picture of a system that often fails them, leaving men and women who operated million-dollar equipment struggling to be deemed qualified for an entry-level job. The economic draft is real, and the transition can be a brutal crash landing. This story works because it offers a fantasy, a cathartic public correction of a profound private wrong. It gives us the salute instead of the sneer, the recognition instead of the dismissal, but life is rarely so cinematic. Most humiliations are quiet, most struggles are invisible, most heroes don't get a general's salute in a ballroom, they get a "thank you for your service" at the grocery store before we turn away. The lingering question isn't whether a billionaire's wife would dump wine on a waiter. It's whether we, in our own smaller ways, participate in systems that make people invisible. Do we look past the server, the cashier, the custodian? Do we equate a person's current circumstance with their worth? Do we forget that every person has a history, a story, a battle we know nothing about? The power of this moment, fictional as it is, lies in the shock of remembrance. The general didn't just see a waiter, he saw a timeline. He saw the past crashing into the present, and he was forced to reconcile the hero of his memory with the struggling man in front of him. His salute wasn't just for Michael. It was an apology from a nation that is too quick to forget, offered by a man who finally remembered. The real victory in this story isn't the job or the new apartment. It's the restoration of a man to himself. It's Michael Vance no longer seeing himself through the world's contempt, but through the reflected respect in a brother soldier's eyes. It's the understanding that our value isn't bestowed by the world's approval. It's reclaimed in moments of unwavering integrity. We are surrounded by quiet battles and invisible scars. The choice this story leaves us with is this: in a world that often mistakes wealth for worth and status for substance, which side of that ballroom do you want to be on? The side that pours the wine or the side that offers the salute? the side that creates invisible people or the side that remembers them. The most powerful stories are the ones that hold up a mirror, not just to society, but to ourselves. They ask us what we see, and more importantly, who we choose to be. If you found this exploration of honor, memory, and the invisible battles among us compelling, make sure you're subscribed. We delve deep into the human stories behind the headlines, the forgotten histories, and the moments that define who we are. Stay with us for more.